Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Today's video is regarding what it is like to be Muslim among non-Muslim friends, and conversations and investigations into the epistemological reality of the universe and its origins, and completing a book in the last few days entitled When Breath Becomes Air, and a couple of pages of philosophical pondering that came out of it, having finished the book last night. Bit of context, backstory. So firstly, I borrowed this book from a close friend who I am currently in the company of in this beautiful house in the Welsh countryside. And no offense, but my experience the last few days has highlighted to me the gulf in between my perception of reality and theirs, and that is to say, my beautiful and long-standing non-Muslim friends who were part of my life, obviously, before I embraced Islam. And the trip has certainly strengthened my iman, alhamdulillah, making me realize that, in fact, I do not want to be like them. My wife, for example, feared that the temptation of smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol would be a moral challenge to myself, having participated in that lifestyle in yesteryear, in a pre-Iman based life. But in fact, it has done the complete opposite. SubhanAllah, made me realize that when one engages in the haram, they sacrifice the beauty and blessings that Allah gives those that submit and sacrifice their life in the way of the divine. And what a vacuous and hopeless life, the one without God, the one without meaning. How flippant, unstable and tempestuous is a life without an objective moral framework. How uncertain a life with rocky foundations. Vacuous a life without the divine, when the signs of the Creator are right in front of our eyes. The arrogance to deny them and bury one's head in the sand without even the mere attempt at reasonable investigation. So, as of course Muslims listening will know, lakum deenakum waliya deen. What can we do? You know, all things come from God, all things come from Allah. But it's been eye-opening. Not only is it a blessing and a privilege to be able to run around and do activities, go for runs and walks and explore the countryside and go to lakes and such, but it's also a beautiful reflection point to discuss the epistemic root of our very existence as human beings, our place in it, and where my non-Muslim friends think they came from and where they think they're going. And the answers don't seem particularly clear and rather grasping. When asked, where did we come from and where are we going? Did we create ourselves? Or did we come from nothing? Well, apparently we're here by chance. And that chance is a reasonable claim to the non-Muslim, it seems, because of the vastness, the gigantic, the titanic, the enormous nature of the universe. And therefore, the chances are not so unlikely. Well, I don't think that is even in line with the secular, scientific, dare I say, atheist viewpoint, because surely, whichever way you cut it, is it not some ridiculous odds for the sperm to meet the egg, to have a prosperous environment, to grow into a fetus, to come out of the birth canal, and then to live a full life on Earth, regardless of all of the millions of years that it took to just get the very basic elements together to build the Earth itself and such. But that seemed to be the thread of thinking, is that, well, actually, things are so large that it just happened by chance. I don't know if that satisfies my curiosities personally, because yes, the universe is large. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is outside of time and space. So it makes sense that it's large. It makes sense that it's inconceivably not only magnificent, but gargantuan. I don't know if that's the word. I was trying to look for a huge word. I mentioned the perfection and the precision and the intricacy, something that can make people giddy and give them a sense of awe and wonderment. But perhaps people substitute their fitrah, their natural constitution, to recognize the hierarchy of existence and the fact that human beings are, I'm sure they'll accept, a speck of dust. But that dust is not insignificant, because we are a dual organism, a spiritual being. And that spiritual being has that dual nature very much because of the Creator, the divine God. So that's why we're different to animals now. Arguably, that's a human-centric approach, no doubt. But we're humans, so it seems reasonable to be human-centric. So I could go into lots of things that I've been talking about this trip: Donald Trump, Andrew Tate, and perhaps just my thrill I find in talking about controversial figures and stoking the fire. And I think what it genuinely is, it's not so much just to be controversial for the sake of it, but to try and bring a different perspective around things that often many people in the mainstream and what's pushed in media and just common think is looking at something from a different angle and thinking like, I'm not pro-Trump, pro-Tate, but at the same time, I'm not just so blindly anti-Trump and anti-Tate just because that seems to be the narrative, and both figures have a fair portion of what they say that is straight up reasonable and on the money. Now, there's another half of what they say and do, which I disagree with and think is reprehensible, but I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So this is to jump into it. It's so beautiful to have perspective, and that's what I'm going to read here, because I had tears in my eyes at the end of this book. I'm not going to read the end of the book that caused that emotional response, but I'm going to read probably the most philosophically grabbing content, and When Breath Becomes Air is tackling some of the stuff that I've mentioned here that is so fundamental to human nature. You have a neurosurgeon diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and challenging read, a gentleman facing death. Not a challenging read, it's an easy read, but emotionally stimulating. So, a gentleman facing death, and on the relationship between doctor and patient. And he says this near the end of the book, probably, God knows, when he has 3, 6, 9 months left, unbeknown to him, although he does know that his death is luring closer and closer. But are we not all terminal? Do we all not have a date with the divine? So I don't agree with everything he says, but I found that there was literary value, and it stirred my philosophical curiosities. So he goes on to say, during my sojourn in ironclad atheism, the primary arsenal levied against Christianity had been its failure on empirical grounds. Surely enlightened reason offered a more coherent cosmos. Surely Occam's razor cut the faithful free from blind faith. There is no proof of God, therefore it is unreasonable to believe in God. Although I had been raised in a devout Christian family, where prayer and scriptural reading were a nightly ritual, I, like most scientific types, came to believe in the possibility of a material conception of reality, an ultimately scientific worldview that would grant a complete metaphysics minus outmoded concepts. A complete metaphysics minus outmoded concepts like souls, God, and bearded white men in robes. I spent a good chunk of my 20s trying to build a frame for such an endeavor. The problem, however, eventually became evident. To make science the arbiter of metaphysics is to banish not only God from the world, but also love, hate, meaning. To consider a world that is self-evidently not the world we live in. That's not to say that if you believe in meaning, you must also believe in God. It is to say, though, that if you believe that science provides no basis for God, then you are almost obligated to conclude that science provides no basis for meaning, and therefore life itself doesn't have any. In other words, existential claims have no weight. All knowledge is scientific knowledge. Yet the paradox is that scientific methodology is the product of human hands and thus cannot reach some permanent truth. We build scientific theories to organize and manipulate the world, to reduce phenomena into manageable units. Science is based on the reproducibility and manufactured objectivity. As strong as that makes its ability to generate claims about matter and energy, it also makes scientific knowledge inapplicable to the existential, visceral nature of human life. The existential, visceral nature of human life is made inapplicable to the scientific knowledge aforementioned, which is unique. Human life, of course, is unique and subjective and unpredictable. Science may provide the most useful way to organize empirical, reproducible data, but its power to do so is predicted on its inability to grasp the most central aspects of human life: hope, fear, love, hate, beauty, envy, honor, weakness, striving, suffering, virtue. Between these core passions and scientific theory, there will always be a gap. No system of thought can contain the fullness of human experience. The realm of metaphysics remains the province of revelation. This, not atheism, is what Occam argued after all. The prototypical atheist then is Graham Greene's commandment from the power and the glory, whose atheism comes from a revelation of the absence of God. The only real atheism must be grounded in a world-making vision. The favorite quote of many an atheist from the French biologist and Nobel Prize winner, forgive my pronunciation, Jacques Monod, belies this revelatory aspect. The ancient covenant is in pieces. Man at last knows that he is alone in an unfeeling immensity of the universe, out of which he emerged only by chance. Yet, the author goes on, the gentleman, the neuroscientist who is now facing the abyss of death in stage 4 lung cancer. Yet I return to the central values of Christianity: sacrifice, redemption, forgiveness, because I found them so compelling. There is a tension in the Bible between justice and mercy, between Old and New Testament, and the New Testament says you can never be good enough. Goodness is the thing, and you can never live up to it. The main message of Jesus, I believed, is that mercy trumps justice every time. Not only that, but maybe the basic message of original sin isn't feeling guilty all the time. Maybe it is more along these lines: we all have a notion of what it means to be good, the fitra, the innate disposition, the natural constitution of a human being, and we can't live up to it all the time. Maybe that's what the message of the New Testament is after all. Even if you have a notion as well defined as Leviticus, one of the books of Moses, you can't live that way. It's just impossible. It's insane. About God, I can say nothing definitive, of course, but the basic reality of human life stands compellingly against blind determinism. Moreover, no one, myself included, credits revelation with any epistemic authority. We are all reasonable people. Revelation is not good enough. Even if God spoke to us, we'd discount it as delusional. So what, I wonder, is an aspiring metaphysician to do? Give up? Almost. Struggle towards the capital T truth, but recognize the task is impossible. Or that if a correct answer is possible, verification certainly is impossible. In the end, it cannot be doubted that each of us can only see part of the picture. The doctor sees one, the patient another, the engineer a third, the economist a fourth, the pearl diver a fifth, the alcoholic a sixth, the cable guy a seventh, the sheep farmer an eighth, the Indian beggar a ninth, the pastor a tenth. Human knowledge is never contained in one person. It grows from relationships we create between each other and the world and is still never complete. The truth comes somewhere above all of them. SubhanAllah, there's a lot there, but it's pretty juicy, and just like consistently, I was like, that's all that I'm about. Just the conversation and the relationship between our impending mortality, the beliefs that we have, the decisions we make, how we wish to live a life of meaning, and or like say the very, I believe it's Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. And when you have the likes of the ancient great philosophers, I know that the modern continental Western canon of philosophy is pretty much filled with nihilistic atheism, but look at what happened to all those guys. Do you know what I mean? The philosophers of antiquity looked at things, I think, through a far more a lens of purity. And what I mean to say there is that when you look at wise people, there's a difference between the scientific knowledge that's mentioned in the passage and touching upon those fundamental human aspects to life. To forgive your parents for the mistakes that they made. To humble yourself to the divine in a universe where you're both in a very bizarre and contradictory way, nothing, but also there is a purpose. You are a part of a much larger story that does mean something. SubhanAllah. So that was the main thing I wanted to get across, was just sharing the passage from this book, When Breath Becomes Air, very emotional end to the book when he passes on, when his daughter is only 8 months old, and he obviously leaves his wife as well. But also that passage was it was like almost the crescendo or capitulation, to use musical terms. It was a natural coming to the end of this trip, where I've spent a couple of days, a couple of nights, because the exact things discussed there was what I was discussing during the day in relation to how our experience in this material plane, if we're on the train tracks of everyday consciousness and on the physical material world, we can't quite grasp and sense and taste all of those nuance and intricate details that actually do make us human. Science can't explain or pinpoint love, consciousness. It can, in the sense that it can say that, neuro science can pinpoint how the brain, releases dopamine or serotonin or something. But as ever, obviously, science is great at allowing us to produce results, to have a good idea as to what will be reproduced in certain environments, but it doesn't give us any epistemic, metaphysical answers as to the why. It's a very difficult and deep game to delve into this in a kind of humble and open state. And I guess the main thing to end upon is that I think it's like a hadith Qudsi, but my own life is testament to this in recent years, is strangely, whatever you give up for the sake of Allah, He replaces with something greater. So that's why I don't feel that I miss out or I yearn for my lifestyle that I had many moons ago in previous years. Because, you know, a life between drinking alcohol and praying to God is a bit of a no-brainer. And I'll end on this because I did mention Trump and Tate earlier. Funny how, well, it's not funny, like I say, I think there's a lot of reprehensible and immoral behavior from both gentlemen, but speaking about a figure like Andrew Tate promoting violence against women and being responsible for what, you know, awful, insecure people do towards other people. Bit of the blame game, because then I said, well, is not alcohol responsible for great atrocities, domestic violence? You know, is that a net benefit to society? Realistically, probably not, but everybody engages in it and nobody would even think to realistically consider its removal from society. So it's interesting how, I don't know why I jumped straight to that, because it's like, I'm not saying that we have to compare Andrew Tate to alcohol, but you know, there's always two sides to a coin. It's the perspective of, you know, with the case, not that I'm not a super pro Tate guy. I was Muslim before Tate, and I don't think he's representing the faith, you know, on the public stage very well at all whatsoever. But with the trial, you know, our so-called fair and free Western world, are we not supposed to be innocent until proven guilty? But then when somebody gets charges labelled upon them, pretty hard to, you know, shake that off. So these have been the conversation points. The legitimacy of the notion that there is a creator, or the fact that somehow everything's a product of randomness and chance. Controversial figures like Trump and Tate. And reading this splendid book, which I thoroughly enjoyed. #1 New York Times bestseller, When Breath Becomes Air. And I think we've naturally come to the end of the video there. Thank you so much for listening. If you've watched the video this far, then certainly do give it the old, because, you know, well, I'll go on with that. And if you're new to the channel, then welcome. You've got a dose of what I'm all about, talking about life and death and God. And also that the ramifications of those conversations which come into family and community, parents, children, spouses, the life of meaninglessness is also why we have the rise and fall of societies. Hedonism and godlessness leads, even in societies of prosperity, wealth, financially, health-wise, so much opportunity, to people not even taking the responsibility to get married and raise families, declining birth rate, talking about a bit of kind of comparative religion, geopolitics, mass media, propaganda, perception, limited perception of nuanced topics, and trying to go one step deeper into how people come to understand issues, because, especially like myself growing up as an Englishman, as a Western dude, I understand on one hand what seems very much oppressive almost when one talks about the power dynamics of men and women, for example. Obviously, religious, traditional Islamic values are not the same as secular, feminist, atheist values. They're obviously very different. So the idea of me not having female friends, me not touching women, my wife not having male friends, my wife being a home maker, staying at home, being, although it's a word again associated with depression, submissiveness and serving and sacrifice are all beautiful qualities that one needs a slice of humble pie to even consider engaging in, and it goes two ways in a prosperous relationship that's obviously there to benefit each other and the children, if one's fortunate enough to have that. So that goes back to Tate as well, about toxic masculinity and how he misrepresents, for example, the values of Islam. We should be celibate or married. It's two pretty clear options regardless if you're a man or woman. Now, sometimes when you go into nuanced points, then the masses will take it and run with it and misrepresent it. But obviously, it seems pretty reasonable that I'm not about the insidious progressive agenda, the woke mind virus, as Peterson and Musk called it. I recognize that as something that's fundamentally anti-God and evil. So what seems obvious to me is for people to step into or recline into traditional values, to look to have families rather than live an individualistic, self-centered, desire-driven, hedonistic lifestyle. Because one can now, because their social expectations have been reduced dramatically. For men to, at least it mentioned in the passage of the book I read, striving up, aiming up, wanting to be more than you are. That's something that I think, at least I, as a man, fills me with movement, with motive, with, inspiration. It adds wood to my fire. This seems like a positive thing now. Is it not better to be a man of honor, to put women and children first, to support them and care for them? Obviously, not to be oppressive and toxic and abusive, and this is a real distortion, and it's pathogenic, you know, it's a cancer basically. Like the rightly ordered individual, the rightly ordered household is obviously going to be one of peace and harmony and prosperity, not abuse and violence and psychological torture. So there's obviously a lot of insecure men, weak men. There's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding. You know, maybe read the book, you know, start delving into your own mortality, start delving into one of the things that separates the reader from all the other people that have died, all the other doctors who have died from lung cancer, is that he studied both medicine and literature, and he read all of the classics, all of the greats. Like, people need to read more and judge less. Anyway, I was trying to finish the video. You got a flavor of what your brother is trying to talk about on this channel. Very grateful to be alive another day. Walhamdulillah. All benefit, if there is any that comes from this video, is from Allah Azza wa Jal, and all mistakes and errors are my own. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all of the good Muslim folk listening. And if you're not Muslim and you're still listening, then you're part of the tribe, you're interested in what I'm saying. And nonetheless, I'm saying big up your good selves. Until next time, good folk, Al Wiedersehen.